Welcome back to the Communication Mastery podcast with me, Mark Berlinson. This is where we unleash the power of understanding to build bridges and not boxes, because we understand that communication is the oxygen of teamwork. We all need communication to thrive in life and work. And in this podcast, we want to increase your communication mastery so that we can all learn to adapt to one another and be effective in our communication. So thanks for being here. Let's learn together. Welcome back to the Communication Mastery podcast with me, Mark Berlinson. This is where we unleash the power of understanding to build bridges and not boxes, because we understand that communication is the oxygen of teamwork. We all need communication to thrive in life and work. And in this podcast, we want to increase your communication mastery so that we can all learn to adapt to one another and be effective in our communication. So thanks for being here. Let's learn together. And this week, we're going to look at how to handle distress productively. Because all of us experience distress in our communication from time to time, don't we? And distress is inevitable because we're human beings and we never fully get along as nicely as we'd love to. But relational disconnects do happen in life. And I want to help you understand why they happen, but also what to do about it to reduce the impact of those relational disconnects. You see, what happens is when one or more of my 7 communication languages doesn't have its filter question answered adequately, then I'm going to experience a predictable and identifiable distress in that language. And the same is going to happen if that language's need from others is not being met in an interaction. So, for example, if my preferred communication style is the influencer language, my filter question is going to be something along the lines of, are we communicating or are we connecting? And my need from others in an interaction is to feel connectedness, but also to receive at least some level of affirmation. And so if any of that is missing and we're interacting in the influencer language, then there's going to be distress for me with that language because those things are not being answered. The same is true of the driving passion that each language has. If that driving passion is not being welcomed or not being recognized, that will cause distress as well. And then the character strength, the communication strength that that language carries has to be welcomed, has to be accepted, has to be made room for in order for there to not be distress. If any of those 4 things are missing, then distress is inevitable. And that's very often where our miscommunications begin. We don't understand which communication style we're communicating in, and so we miss each other. One is speaking one communication language, the other is speaking a different one, and those needs are not being met, those questions are not being answered, and therefore we're not making a connection. Every one of those different things can spark distress flares, and eventually, if you don't address those distress flares, then they will lead on into increasing levels of distress until the distress becomes chronic. I've had a few clients recently where I would say that they have been borderline on chronic distress in their primary language, especially if their profile has one language strongly at the beginning before the other 6. Remember, we've talked before that we all have all 7 communication styles within our profiles, but often people will have one language that stands out more strongly than the others. And so the self-awareness that comes when I can learn to recognize and distinguish the distress flares is very valuable. I need to understand that the distress is not just being caused by you misunderstanding me, it's also caused by me misunderstanding me. And so if I can recognize my own distress flares, I can then retain the initiative to address the issue that's causing the distress, to resolve the miscommunication by adapting to the person I want to connect with or I want to communicate with. I may have a general awareness that I'm in distress, But if I have more than one strong language in my profile, then it's very easy to miss defining which language is in distress. Let me give you an example of that. If I sense that I'm in distress, I already talked about the influencer language, which is a high language for me. If I can identify I want to argue or deny or escape in this setting, those are distress flares for the influencer language. However, that's not my only strong language. I also have the shaper language strong in my own profile. And so it may be that my distress looks more like I want to criticize, or I want to eliminate someone who's being unhelpful in this setting, or I want to take over and just do it myself. Those would be distress flares of the shaper language, which is very different from the influencer. Until I can identify what kind of distress I'm experiencing, I don't know how to address the issue that's causing it. Just as in the medical world, diagnosis is vital for effective treatment. And it's the same with communication styles. I want to be able to find the right solution. And the solutions for the influencer language are very different from the solutions for the shaper language. And so I don't want to waste time and cause further relational disconnect by trying to solve the issue in the wrong language. I want to focus on the true solutions rather than maybe blaming my wife or blaming whoever I'm interacting with. If I can define the distress more clearly, now I've got the steps I need to be able to address that and find a solution. I've done a fair bit of coaching with couples recently, and what I've seen a few times in a row here is that when we're living in distress, and that distress is becoming borderline chronic distress, then it gets to the point where everything the other person says or does is a reason to respond in distress, to throw distress flares at them, if you like. And that's a toxic response that actually doesn't resolve the issues. But when we are in a relational disconnect of that kind, it's very easy to just keep lobbing these communication hand grenades, I might call them, at one another, hoping that that will change the other person, when actually I need to change myself and the way I'm approaching the problem and approaching the distress. So instead of lobbing distress flares, what I've done is to coach my clients to turn that distress into an invitation to help. So to say, I need help with whatever the issue is, or I need help because I'm sensing this, or I'm feeling that, or I'm thinking the other, because that's going to invite the other person into your own understanding of why there is distress. So I have to define my own distress first and then turn it into an invitation to help. I need help because I feel we're not connecting. Can you help me feel a sense of connection? Or I need help with the feeling that I have that you don't want to affirm me, or that there isn't an affirmation of what I'm doing in this setting. Can you help me find some place of affirmation? It may not be the area we're disagreeing about, but can we affirm something? Because I understand that the language in my profile that is in distress is the influencer language that needs affirmation in order to thrive. So in opening up, I need help, I'm inviting the other person to demonstrate that they do want to help. And 90% of the time, if not more, that is the case. Most people in relational disconnects don't want that disconnection to continue. They are fighting the fight in distress because they want this to work, not because they want this to fail. And if we can give them those tools to turn it around from throwing Molotov cocktails at each other to opening the door to help, that makes a huge difference. Every great marriage is built on connection. Can you imagine what it would be like if you had a marriage where every conversation brings you closer together rather than further apart? A marriage where what you say is actually understood and not misrepresented. It is possible to have a marriage like that. And if you'd like that, I invite you to go to my website and click on Communication IQ for Couples. Let's make a start today on your marriage embracing communication mastery. So, for example, I might identify with my shaper language the distress flare of wanting to take over when I'm faced with a volunteer who's not following my plan for the responsibilities I've assigned to them. They're not doing what I've asked them to do in the way I've asked them to do it, and it's taking us off track from our goal. So if I'm tempted to push them aside and say, never mind, I'll do this myself, what I need to do is to change that distress into something that invites them into it and gives them the opportunity. So rather than pushing them aside, I might say something like, I need help to see your plan for this task. Or could you help me see the next steps in what you're doing? Because my shaper language is a little bit in distress because I'm seeing the current process, the current state of play as a little disorganized, lacking direction, lacking structure. Both of those approaches are going to open the door to improvement for the volunteer, but also clarification of what they are trying to do. It may be that they're trying to do something, but I'm not aware of it. And so that can clarify the circumstances without dismissing their effort, and it's inviting them to step up to a higher level. American business wastes billions of dollars every year on miscommunication. If you're ready to change that trend, invest in Communication IQ today, because it will give you a great return in terms of employee alignment, retention, customer engagement, profitability, sales outcomes. All of those areas will grow as you understand the science of communication. So go to my website at markburlinson.com, click on the business button, and let's have an introductory chat today about how I can help your business be more productive by enhancing communication. Then another skill that we can grow is to correctly and clearly identify the distress in someone else accurately, so that we can use that insight to offer them the help that they need. There was one person I was working with recently who was complaining to me about their lack of ability in public speaking. And they were like, well, I just never know what to say. I feel awkward. I've not been trained. I can't do this. It was just this sort of stream of complaining in our coaching session. And it was to the extent that this particular client was almost borderline depressed, that they kept having to do public speaking and they just couldn't do it. And I'm useless and I'm hopeless and it's never going to change. And I was recognizing in that, with complaining and a sense of depression, those are the distress flares of the responder language. And looking at their profile, I see, yes, the responder language is one of their higher preferred communication languages. And so recognizing those distress flares, first of all, I wanted to reassure them that I cared about the struggle they were facing. You know, I really care about this, and I see that it's painful. I see that it's difficult, and I'm going to help you. I want to help you get through this, that I'm hearing your cry for help. Because the responder needs to know that the person they're relating to cares, but they also need to be heard and understood. And then, having established that connection, then we discussed some of the essential qualities that the responder language has to work at in order to be healthy and successful. And one of those is to professionalize rather than personalize. The responder is a very compassionate language that tends to take things personally. But if the responder can also act professionally without losing compassion, but to professionalize or objectify what they're looking at rather than taking it subjectively, then that can often be an aha moment for that particular language when it's strong for a client. And this particular client immediately recognized in our conversation that they were approaching public speaking, whether it was in a meeting or whether it was in a larger setting, they were approaching it as a task where they took every reaction personally. And so often in larger public meetings, you don't get the reactions you hope for, and it's easy to take that personally. Oh, I'm being boring, or I'm not engaging the crowd, or whatever. But very often they're simply listening, and it's not registering on their faces, or you're not close enough to them to see the connection that's there. And so when you professionalize that problem, you can put it aside and not take it to heart. So my client said, that insight is worth every penny of what I paid you for this coaching. And he went on to speak publicly with much more confidence, simply recognizing that specific issue. So those are some of the ways that we can handle distress productively. Firstly, examine my own distress flares and begin to recognize them so that I can process them with my understanding of the communication styles, so that I can seek solutions rather than simply throwing distress flares at whoever I'm interacting with. And then secondly, use my knowledge of the Communication IQ tool to be able to define clearly distress in others and know then how to help them. Always, distress is an invitation to help. Every one of us is different, but we can handle our distress productively. So let me know how I could help you handle distress in yourself or in others. You can get back to me using the contact form on my website. And let me know what distress you've experienced. Let's address it in a future episode, maybe. We can always respond effectively with solutions that can resolve the problem, which is far more productive than staying in distress and everybody being disconnected as a result. So we'll be back next week. And until then, hope you enjoy putting some of those insights into practice. Thanks for being with me. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. It would mean a lot to me if you'd rate and review the podcast so it helps more listeners to find us. But also, would you give me your feedback on things you'd like to hear about in future episodes? And remember to share the episode with a friend if you see something that would benefit them as well. You can reach me with feedback through my website at markburlinson.com. Just click on the contact button and send me a message. I respond to everyone personally, and I really want to hear from you. So thank you again for listening, sharing, reviewing, and giving me your feedback. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. It would mean a lot to me if you'd rate and review the podcast so it helps more listeners to find us. But also, would you give me your feedback on things you'd like to hear about in future episodes? And remember to share the episode with a friend if you see something that would benefit them as well. You can reach me with feedback through my website at markburlinson.com. Just click on the contact button and send me a message. I respond to everyone personally, and I really want to hear from you. So thank you again for listening, sharing, reviewing, and giving me your feedback.